Hey everybody, it's Dr. A, and in this video we're going to be talking about the systems of the body. Now, right before we get started, I want to put a challenge before you, and that challenge is this. How many of the body systems can you recall without referring to notes that you might have readily available, without asking a friend, and without doing a quick search on Google? Here's how this is going to work. I'm going to ask you in your notes to take just a moment and write down all of the body systems that you can remember. Now, once you've done that, and once you've exhausted everything that you can think of, or all of the systems that you can think of, I want you to come back to the video, press play, and let's see if we can get them all together. So take a moment, pause the video now, and I'll see you back in just a second. So how many systems did you list? 11, 12, 13 or so? Well, if you're within that range, I think you're in a good place. So let's talk about these systems together. Now, one of the ways that I like to do this is by listing all the systems alphabetically. For me, it's just a great way to remember and to recall what's going to come right after I mention one particular system. So again, if we start in alphabetical order, the first system that we're going to come across is the cardiovascular system. So we will start with it, then we'll list the digestive system, the endocrine system, and let's pause here for just a second because the next system that I'm going to list for you may be one that you didn't list initially, and that's okay because we're going to talk about it more in just a moment. But this next system is what we refer to as the glymphatic system. Now, the reason that we are introducing this particular term or this particular system is because it's relatively new. And I know that might sound strange to hear that there's a new body system, but again, we're going to talk about that momentarily. So now that we've got the glymphatic system listed, here is what comes up next. We've got the integumentary system, the lymphatic system, the muscular system, the nervous system, the reproductive systems, the respiratory system, the skeletal system, and last but not least, the urinary system. So now that we've got all these systems listed, we can now start to create some kind of category or some kind of classification system to help us better organize these systems. So here's what I'd like you to do next. Within your notes, let's jot down some terms that will serve as categories for our body systems. Here's the first one. We would say that we've got infrastructure systems. Following this, we have regulation systems. We've got energy systems. We've also got reproductive systems. And then at the top of our list here, we can say that we have a protective system. So now that we've got those categories listed, here's what I'd like us to do. Let's just remember all the systems that we talked about just a second ago. That should be appearing on your screen now. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to categorize each of these systems and place them in their rightful place. So let's start with our infrastructure systems. The systems that we can list here would be the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, the muscular system, and the skeletal system. For our regulation systems, we could list the endocrine system, the urinary system, the lymphatic system, and the glymphatic system. So let's pause here for just a second. Well, what do we mean by infrastructure systems? Well, by infrastructure systems, we're essentially saying that these systems, the ones that we've listed, they are crucial for the foundation of the body. Now, with our regulation systems, as the name implies, these systems are responsible for regulating a number of body processes. So let's go back to our categories here. Our next classification is the energy systems. And the ones that we would list here are the digestive system and the respiratory system. And our next one is simply the reproductive system. And for that, we would of course list the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system. So going back for just a second with our energy systems, what we're talking about here is that these systems are responsible for helping our body to generate energy so that our bodies can do the work that it needs to do to survive. Now, with our reproductive system, of course, we've got our male and female reproductive systems. Those systems are essentially responsible for helping to reproduce and maintain life. Now, with our last category here, we've got the protective system, and this is our integumentary system. Now, for this, the name is kind of giving it away for us. Our integumentary system serves as a protective nature, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So next, we're going to do a brief summation of all of the body systems, just so you have working knowledge about what each of these systems do. Now, again, the first one that we've got on our docket is the cardiovascular system. And the primary function of this is to transport oxygen and nutrients to our body's tissues. The next system that we'll take a look at together is the digestive system, and its function is to process the food that we consume, and through the consumption of our food, our digestive system is responsible for taking that food and essentially converting it into energy for the body. Now, in addition to that, our digestive system also serves as a way to get rid of waste or products that our body no longer needs. The next system is the glymphatic system. And so we're going to camp here for just a second to talk a little bit more about what this system is all about, since we said earlier that this is a relatively new system. So with this system, one of the things that we need to do is identify the components of it. Now, the glymphatic system is essentially comprised of two existing systems. We've got the nervous system, and we've got the lymphatic system that make up our glymphatic system. Now, let's start by detailing the more important pieces as relates to the nervous system. Now, the nervous system has two unique types of cells. The first one, we refer to those as glial cells. Now, if we look at the first part of that word, glial, the letters G, L, I, and A, glia, in Greek, that word means glue. And so if we think about it for just a second, anytime we think about glue, we might think about stickiness, or we may think about glue being used to support something. Well, that gives an indication as to what glial cells do. They are support cells. And so you may wonder, well, what are glial cells supporting? Well, they're supporting other cells that are connected to the nervous system. And we just simply refer to those as neurons. So our glial cells support our neurons. Our lymphatic system is the drainage system for the cardiovascular system. Now, we'll talk more about this in another video, but essentially what happens is that our cardiovascular system intentionally drains itself, and that fluid that's been drained becomes part of our lymphatic fluid. And it's through our lymphatic fluid that we are able to have the oxygen and the nutrients from our blood get to a variety of our body's tissues. So together, these systems, of course, make up our glymphatic system. So let's take a look at the image that you see here on your screen. What we're taking a look at is a zoomed in picture of what we would find in the brain. And so essentially, we're looking at the glymphatic system, how our nervous system connects to or combines with our lymphatic system. Now, if we look at the image here, we've got a key or a legend that lets us know the images or the structures that we see. Now, to the far left, we see that we've got a structure listed here as our neuron. And of course, those are the primary cells of the nervous system. And we'll notice that we have 3 neurons in this particular picture. And right next to that, we have an image of an astrocyte. Now, an astrocyte is essentially a glial cell. And remember, we said that those glial cells are support cells, and what they're supporting are the neurons. Now, directly next to that, we've got something listed here as the aquaporin 4 channel. Now, these channels are unique because what they do is they allow for things to enter them and to exit them. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Now, right next to that, we've got something listed here as amyloid beta, or you'll oftentimes hear this referred to as beta amyloid. And if you're writing with me, you can jot this down in your notes. This is essentially a type of protein. And this particular protein is associated with things like Alzheimer's disease and dementia when it has a buildup in the brain. So the next thing that we see here in our legend is cerebrospinal fluid. So let's talk through this and we'll show how the cerebrospinal fluid works here as we look at the glymphatic system. Now, what's going to take place is we're going to have our cerebrospinal fluid. It is going to move through our glymphatic system. Essentially, it's moving through the area that we're showcasing here. And as this fluid begins to move through this area, what's taking place is the nourishing of our glial cells and the nourishing of our neurons. Now, what is providing the nourishment essentially is things like oxygen and glucose and other things that help these cells to function the way they normally do. And so one of the benefits here is that we get a chance to have the removal of a buildup of proteins like beta amyloid as our cerebrospinal fluid begins to flow through this area. And what that's going to do is to help push these beta amyloid particles out of the brain so that they can be removed. Now, here's the next thing that we need to talk about for just a second. Well, if this is how the glymphatic system works, and if this is how we get a chance to remove things that might be harmful to the body like beta amyloid, well, first we need to ask the question, well, what is it that activates this particular system? How do we turn it on? How do we know that it's working? Well, here's the thing that I'd like you to make note of. We mentioned just a moment ago that the endocrine system regulates everything that happens within the body. Now, here's what I'd like you to add to your notes. Essentially, one of the things that happens is that our glymphatic system is activated primarily when we're asleep. And so what that means is that when we're awake, we have an increased level of a hormone called norepinephrine. And when we're awake, that increased hormonal regulation means that our glymphatic system is relatively shut down. So what we're getting at is that there is a connection between individuals who consistently don't get the amount of rest and sleep that they need on a day-to-day basis and a buildup of proteins like beta amyloid. And once individuals begin to have a buildup of proteins like beta amyloid, it essentially could lead to complications such as Alzheimer's disease and or dementia. So the question is this: what can we do? What role can we play to help avoid this as much as possible? Well, 3 things that I want to share with you to regulate this particular system or to make sure it's activated. One of the things that's helpful is to ensure that we are sleeping in a cool environment. Now, we're going to link a description to an article about the glymphatic system in this particular video just so that you get more information about it. But this is seen as one of the things that we can do to actually help play a role in activating the glymphatic system. Now, in addition to that, is us getting the appropriate amount of rest that we need on a day-to-day basis. And I'm willing to bet that maybe we don't all get the recommended amount of sleep that we need from day to day. Now, traditionally, one of the things that we hear often, and there's some truth to it, is that we typically need between 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Now, that might vary depending on age and other factors, but in general, that's a pretty safe range to shoot for, anywhere between 7 to 8 hours of sleep each night. Now, one of the other things that we can do to help play our role in activating the glymphatic system is to ensure that we're consuming a healthy and or well-balanced diet. So those 3 things together help us ensure that we have activated our glymphatic system. Now, the other system that we'll talk about, and we've alluded to earlier, is the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is all about our hormones. And our hormones essentially regulate any and everything that takes place within the body. Now, the next system that we'll look at here is the integumentary system. Now, admittedly, this is a system that we give a lot of attention to. We wash this system, we lotion this system, we want to make sure that this system looks good before we head out of the door. But one of the major things and major functions of the integumentary system is to protect us. And so if you'll remember earlier, we alluded to the fact that our integumentary system can be labeled as a protective system. And what it's doing is it is protecting the internal parts of us from the external environment. And we'll also see that that plays a connection to our immune system or the lymphatic system as well. Now, speaking of the lymphatic system, this system is again often referred to as the immune system, and it assists our body in fighting infections and or diseases. So again, this is going to be the system that attacks things like viruses, bacteria, and fungi, and again, attempts to keep us healthy and safe. Now, another role that this system is responsible for playing is to assist in the return of tissue fluid back into the bloodstream. And that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about in another video. Now, the next system that we'll make note of here is the muscular system. The muscular system essentially produces movement for the body. But did you also know it also plays a role in helping us to generate heat? Our muscles provide a support system for the body as well. Now, the next system is the nervous system. And I like to say that the nervous system is responsible for powering or activating the muscular system. Another thing that we can make note of here is that our nervous system is responsible for sensing various stimuli. In other words, it's our nervous system that enables us to feel things like heat and cold and things like pain and touch. All of those things are possible because of the nervous system. Now, the nervous system also works to coordinate or to regulate other body system functions as well. Now, the next system that we'll take a look at is the respiratory system. And as you may well know, it's this system that's responsible for delivering oxygen-rich blood and nutrients to our body's tissues. Now, the next system that we'll take a look at is the reproductive system. And of course, we've got the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system. And what these systems are responsible for doing is producing sex cells, and they're also responsible for producing hormones. Now, the next system that we'll take a look at here is the skeletal system. And as you might imagine, it's this system that provides a framework for the entire body. In addition, it's the skeleton that serves as points or sites of attachment for our muscles. And in other words, it is possible for us to produce movement not only because of the muscles and not only because of the nerves that power them, but also because of the skeleton that supports them and serves as a site of attachment. Now, in addition, our skeleton does something that's really unique and something that we might not think of offhand. Our skeleton is responsible for a process known as hematopoiesis. Now, hematopoiesis is essentially the formation of blood cells. So believe it or not, it's our skeleton that's responsible for the formation of our red blood cells and our white blood cells and other components that we find in the blood. Now, the last system that we'll take a look at is the urinary system. And this urinary system is a regulatory system, and what it's responsible for doing is forming and releasing urine from the body. Now, another important role that's connected to that is that our urinary system serves as a primary mechanism to help regulate our blood's pH level. So again, those are our systems in a nutshell. Now, right before we end, I want to talk about one last thing that makes this whole thing work. Now, what we've done essentially thus far is we've talked about the systems of the body. But in order to get there, we've got to talk about how the body is organized, and we call this the levels of organization. So here's the first thing that I want to put before you. Anything that we would classify as a solid, liquid, or gas, that means that it is essentially made up of chemicals. And so when we combine those things become cells. And if we take multiple cells and merge them together, we have tissues. And if we take multiple tissues and merge those together, we've got organs. And if we've got multiple organs merged together that perform a specific function or role, we begin to call that an organ system. And if we have multiple organ systems, we then call that an organism. And the thing that kind of covers or encompasses an organism is what we refer to as the biosphere. That's the world or the environment around us. So hopefully that was helpful in giving you an overview of all of the body systems, in addition to understanding the levels of organization of the human body. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.